Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Navigating Amateur Motocross, episode number 16. This episode is brought to you by T-Dub out of Australia, the finest custom gear. You guys can see here in my office, that's our second quarter gear. Want to thank Todd and Jill for all their support of the show. And man, I can't believe, Derek, we've got another month under our belt. We're going to keep our conversation going on arm pump / part 2. But before we get started, man, how you been?
I've been doing all right, man. It's been a whirlwind the last really 3 months. I feel like crazy that I damn near missed today's thing. You text me on something else, and I'm like, oh, it's 2 o'clock, So, that's funny because last night I'm like, okay, I saw the email that we had. I'm like, okay, I need to log on, and then literally just get caught up with what you're doing. So, yeah, been good and been all over. I mean, I've been traveling a lot and some good, some bad, some ugly, and it's been interesting.
Yeah, it's talking with clients. I do my client calls Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and it's always interesting for a lot of people that live in the snowborn, area. It's like cold, 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 and then it's just a snap, and then all of a sudden we're in the heat and the humidity, in the hot, humid conditions of summer, and it's like, gosh, just 2 months ago it was too cold and the ground was frozen, and now we've got our rounds of regionals are starting here in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and no pun intended, it's literally WFO from here on out. But I really appreciate you carving out. I know you're kind enough to keep me in the loop of what you're doing and where you're at. So I appreciate, for all the listeners and subscribers, I know that they really enjoy your insights. I get quite a bit of feedback. So thank you so much. We were digging into that whole subject of arm pump. We're not going to obviously be able to exhaust it in just a couple shows. We will move on to a new subject next month, but when we were talking last month, we were talking about the idea of that unique balance between the human body. And I want to make sure that no matter what the bike serves up or no matter what the track demands of the rider, that athlete's fit enough to do it. And I always say, when an athlete feels balanced and they can push back on what the speed and the track demands of them, that's a perfect day. I wanted to kind of throw the ball back over to your side of the court. I know we didn't get a chance to get to all of your elements, and I know there's quite a bit of them. Obviously, a motorcycle, I call it the moving gyroscope. There's just so many moving parts to make a bike feel comfortable. From your perspective and all the years that you've seen, what would you say would be the next layer of peeling back the solution to arm pump?
Well, outside of the physical, which we'll talk a lot about today's show. So obviously, hopefully we go back and forth on that. And get your insights on that. Is the motorcycle. So there's two people out, there's two things on the track, the motorcycle and the rider. So we can work on both of those individuals independently. And then of course, realistically, we need to work on both of those individuals together. So it's like a marriage, and you got to put the right combination of pieces together to make it successful. We've talked on previous episodes a lot about testing your motorcycle, how to test. I mean, I actually need to put a dang YouTube. We should do it as part of our show or something, is like how to test your bike. What are the basics? Because it doesn't exist anymore. Like, when's the last time you saw a dad and a kid carrying a notebook around and testing their motorcycle? And then we talked about in the show, and you said you got some good feedback on that from people about, hey, have you ridden your stock bike? And have you put some hours in on it? No? Oh, you just got your suspension done? You just sent it right out? You never even wrote it? And there's actually a local guy, I guarantee you doesn't listen to the podcast. So, I'll share a funny story about it is, he's in our group chat with some stuff, and he's like, he had a brand new 350, sweet bike. And the guy's the nicest guy ever. Super, super awesome dude. And I'm like, hey man, that thing needs to get some dirt on it. And he's like, oh, I'm waiting on suspension to get back. Okay. I'm like, well, have you rode it yet? Oh, stock suspension is terrible. Brand new 2025 KTM 350. And I'm like, and he's like a vet, not a Loretta's capable guy. No offense to him. Great rider, good guy. So I'm like, dude, what? He's like, hey, it's terrible. Well, on the back end of that, I'd heard some stuff from different guys, and he had some really nice suspension, like full blown from big company, A kit, beautiful stuff, right? And I guess he was fighting that setup a little bit, and he had never even rode the stock stuff. And then he gets loaned a set of forks from a local, very, 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 very fast guy. They were, unbeknownst to this guy, bone stock 2025 forks. And he rides them. He's like, dude, love those setups. So then he calls the suspension company up. Hey, I need like a local pro setting for my stuff, because I rode this local pro stuff and it's awesome. And the guy's like laughing. We're laughing about this story because he just needed to go ride his stock bike, and so our show talks about that. So how to handle arm pump. Number one is, you said earlier, I think it was off camera before we started, but about like some things we wanted to touch on. Where's your body positioning? So are you in the right position on the bike? And Tomac talked about gypsy tails, hanging on the back, not hanging off, those types of things. So that's where setup can help. If your bike's consistently too low in the rear and you're having to hang on to it, it's not kind of helping you there, then sure, that's not helping you out. So then you have to say, okay, what am I struggling with? Well, I'm struggling falling off the back of the bike. Well, then maybe let's take some sag out of the thing. Let's stiffen it up a little bit, or a little stiffer spring, or all of these factors. But on the flip side of that, if you're an Aaron Plessinger type and you want your bike low in the rear, and you're getting arm pump because you feel like you can't ever get far enough back type of a deal, then you might need to add a little bit of sag, lower the rear. And it's no offense to the Chris Keepers of the world or the MXAs, which I think do a good job. But if you're the type that says, oh, I ran the Chris Keeper settings, why? You're not Chris. So if you feel like it's one way or the other way, maybe that's where you can go make some super, super quick, simple adjustments to your motorcycle to get you through the day. Or, for example, move the forks up, move the forks down. Those types of settings make a huge difference. I've worked with guys, we talked about on the show, where all I've done is clickers, sag, and fork heights. That's all we've done. And they've left the day being like, I can't believe that's the same motorcycle. And it's not even a huge range. You're not like, oh yeah, I went 20 clicks in. And no, it's like, hey, we went 4 clicks this way. We moved the forks up. We changed the sag, which probably wasn't right to begin with. You talk about this every single day. And it's like, all of a sudden it's a new motorcycle and you ride way better. Well, why aren't you doing that on your own? Why do you need me to do that? All I'm doing is moving it left or right. I'm like, hey, oh, that was worse. Let's try the other way. I don't know the answer for you. All I can do is help you get there. So that's one side of the bike. And we'll get more in depth on that here shortly. But what about you, Coach? What are the primary drivers for arm pump in your opinion?
Well, I'll stay right on the theme of what you're talking about, and it's that body positioning. There's a couple ways you can look at the word body positioning, right? I look at the human body as 3 dimensions of movement. You have the left and the right leg, obviously. You have what's going on in the front and the back side of the body, and you have what's going on above and below the belly button. We think about how we break down the motorcycle: left and right peg, above and below the seat, and in front and behind the pegs. That's why I think the strength training off the bike has to be a little bit more specific to riding I would call it, I refer to it as the moving gyroscope. The idea here is when you are lifting weights, you need to be working on proprioceptive balance, finding that sweet spot that when the bike bounces around, whether it's front wheel high, rear wheel high, or it decides to kick left or right, you literally intuitively are able to counterbalance that. Well, that sounds great while everybody's listening to this comfortable. What happens when your fourth gear tapped, you transition from off the gas to on the brakes, and all of a sudden you unload that rear end and it hits a kicker at precisely the same time? Your body needs to sense that that's happening, and you have to have the strength to be able to pull the bike back into the right position. What becomes very interesting, and I think most everybody who listens to this understands, from the belly button down controls the rear wheel. Belly button above controls the front wheel. Well, are you lifting to the specificity of riding a motorcycle? So if you're going to ask me, now again, this is a continuation of our last episode that we talked about arm pump. I want you to think about muscle symmetry. When you mention the idea of staying centered in the bike, I want you to stay centered in the bike with proprioceptive balance, meaning that as the bike moves around, you just naturally counterbalance it. Jed is probably the recent example of, never looks like he's fighting the bike. A lot of people mock him because he has a dance background, but literally he doesn't fight the bike. He's created a lot of, we talked about this a couple times. The idea that he stands through a lot of the ruts. So now every riding coach says that that's the only way to get through ruts. Like you said, whether you want the bike stiffer or you want the rear end lower, that's personal preference. And I think people need to get away from listening to what supposedly the pros say they're doing and start intuitively figuring out what works for you. I understand listening to those types of experts, but I don't want this to sound disrespectful, but you're listening to somebody who's riding on an unattainable bike, and then you're taking something that you've got to purchase. It just doesn't align.
It's funny you say that. I was going to bring this up today. While the factory bikes are not that much better than a stock bike, I mean, they are in the realm of dirt bikes, like the way we think of things. But from a percentage standpoint, if it was 20% better in every category, that would be a wildly successful factory bike. Like that would just be, I bet you 90% of what you see on them is within 10% of your bike. So of like how much better it could be or how much whatever. But that said, in our sport, we're chasing 1-2%. So a 10% better bike is like a phenomenal bike. So at the end of the day, one thing I try to tell people is like, whatever you see out there that's blue, red, green, or whatever, just act as if it's not even the same bike that you buy. It's not a Yamaha. It's not a Kawasaki. It's not a Honda. That's not the same bike. Don't think about it. Don't look at it. Don't copy it. Now, granted, the industry doesn't want to tell you that. They want to sell you every part that you can see on there. But It's just not the same motorcycle, and it's not for the same rider. That's the biggest thing you have to understand. Like when Jet and Hunter were the team was welding up those frames, while the consumer end seems to think this new Honda is considerably better, this stiffer frame was the right step in the right direction. Odds are that that motorcycle, for the vast majority of people purchasing a Honda, the one that they were racing at the time, the welded version, would have been worse, especially if you rode their suspension, right? Like if you're Joe Blow and you hop on Jet and Hunter's suspension, you might be like, dude, I can jump anything to flat. Yeah, you can. But then like the track gets rough and chattery and you're like, it's beating the hell out of me, dude. Because they don't go as slow as you go through the bumps. No pun, no negative on that. Granted, that's not our focus on this show. We're talking about elite amateurs. But even still, if you're a buck 20 soaking wet, maybe 115, and you hop on a 250F and you try to run Jet suspension settings, I could promise you it wouldn't go very well. It's just too stiff for you. And he doesn't have a stiff pro bike, but right, your kid would say when the track's smooth, it's great, but when it got rough, your kid would really struggle. I actually dealt with that with a local client recently. So where he bought a kit suspension, we talked about it from whoever. He had one of his local guys do a suspension. The guy's knowledgeable, and the kid's first impression was, "I can jump anything." That's literally the message I got. He said he can jump anything. It's flat. It just takes it. It's great. I'm like, awesome. And then he gets out to the actual race day, and he's like, "Oh, he's beating him up." I'm like, well, that's the challenge of how do you practice on what you race. So, and of course, then what happens when your bike's beating you up and you're not used to it? You don't have any seat time. You get arm pump, right? So goes back to what you're saying. So yeah, 100%. What do you think about when you're really, 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 okay. I agree with there's on the bike fitness and there's off the bike fitness. You can be really fit off of a dirt bike and have zero on the dirt bike fitness. Talk to me about that. Why is that?
It goes back to how unique our sport is. No disrespect. We do a lot of work with triathletes, endurance athletes, ball and stick sport athletes as well. When you look at the idea that our motocrossers, amateurs all the way up to the professionals, they cross train on bicycles, swimming, running, mountain bikes, gravel bikes, e-bikes, all these different things, right? When you're looking at the world of two wheels and a motor, it's a completely different animal. I can take any amateur motocross racer and I can get them in shape for a triathlon. Take a typical triathlete and they're not going to be able to go out and do 230s plus two. Just not going to happen. It's a completely different level of fitness. And that's what's so interesting about the bike. And everybody listening to this has heard a family member that says, well, doesn't the bike just do all the work for you? You just hang on and enjoy it, right? It's a red carpet ride out there. So that's what's so interesting about this. When we were just talking about being centered on the bike, we talked about that left and the right, above and below the seat, in front and behind the pegs. To add another level of complexity to it, and this could eliminate a lot of frustrations for our listeners. Let's say that you unfortunately got in a car accident and you broke your right leg. Well, because that right leg is going to be put into a cast, you have what we call muscle atrophy. The right leg is going to shrink because of the lack of physical activity, the lack of load bearing, the muscle is going to shrink.
That happens fast.
Happens very quickly. So let's assume that you've gotten a bad car accident. You have a compound fracture of your right femur. What we do is we go and we actually measure with a tape measure, we measure the circumference of the thigh difference between the left and the right. You go, Rob, why would that matter? Well, unfortunately I broke my right leg and it's atrophied. Now I've got maybe an inch, 2 inches. I've seen it as much as an 8-inch difference between the right and the left leg for a heavily muscular guy. Well, now think about that. You're standing on the foot pegs, you're going through deep ruts. Well, that left leg, you're going to be dominant just because of sheer size. So you're going to be left leg dominant, which now you throw the left and the right side of the bike off. When you look at the idea of you've got long ruts, maybe up the face of the jump, right? You're trying to stay centered on the bike. Well, now all of a sudden, when you go off the face of the jump, you are going to be putting more weight on that left peg just simply because of raw power. We can get into neuromuscular and muscle memory and all that, but that's not what's important for this conversation. So now what we've got is because we start to throw the balance of the bike off, now we start putting a death grip on the bike. And these are the little subtle nuances that a lot of people don't realize. If we had 10 people who were kind enough to watch this show and we all got on a live call together, we'd get 10 different opinions on what is causing someone's arm pump.
Right.
And we can talk, this is not one that we want to get into right this second, but there was a pickle company that was in our sport for a long time. And they're like, this cures arm pump. Well, what's in pickle juice is a lot of salt, and that's an electrolyte. So you could say you had an electrolyte imbalance and therefore you weren't cramping. So therefore the pickle juice fixed it. You could say, man, I've got a new trainer at the gym. Well, it could be that the trainer finally starts to diminish the gap between the size of your left leg and your right leg. So you quit throwing the balance of the bike off. So it was more of a strength issue, not an electrolyte issue. When we talk about the idea that you've got to stay centered over the bike, well, if you don't practice, if you keep using stationary equipment, you don't train exactly what you need, which is proprioceptive balance when you're on the motorcycle. So you look good with your shirt off, but it's not specific. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we run into.
I would say, is there any way, this is a great question for you. I have my thoughts, but I'm not no backing on it. Can you train off the bike and be, is it capable to train off the motorcycle and be fit on the bike, or is there a minimum level of riding required?
It would be great to say that you could get all your race specific. And even for those of you that may not, I mean, this is navigating amateur motocross. So we're going to assume that everybody who's listening is on a fast track to wanting to be the best as a 65 rider all the way up to the vet. Nothing substitutes seat time. Now that's easy for you and I to say, Derek. The problem is for our vet riders, they've got families, they've got jobs, they've got responsibilities. They might not get done with work and it's already dark and there's no place open with lights at night. So they can only ride on the weekends. That's why and I don't want to sound like this hokey. We've got to focus on what we have to work with, not just focus on what we don't have access to. If you're somebody who works from sunrise to sunset, we recognize you're not going to be able to ride. Not because you don't want to, the logistics don't allow for it.
On that front, so we've talked about this a lot, and I agree with you entirely, is that a lot of these kids ride too much. So how do you break down for Arm Pump the balance between off the bike training and on the bike training? Let's just say the kid can do anything they want. What do you think is the idealized version of hours per week on bike? Obviously, each kid's training capability is a little bit different, maybe, but that said, I'm a believer that you have to do a ton of off the bike work for two reasons. One is it's safer, so you can get your fitness in without getting hurt. And then number two, it's controllable. You can control your heart rate, your zones, your targets, your focus, all of those things. So you can 100% control your workout. Really hard to do on a dirt bike. And then number three, I think when you ride too much, depending on how you ride, how you're wired, A, you could be just too much high end, right? It's just way too much beating you down. But B, you're maybe not establishing the habits you need to establish. So you're not actually improving yourself because you're just riding too much. You're reinforcing the bad habits you already have by riding more, as opposed to riding less and focusing on working on your bad habits. So is there something, how do you as a trainer how do you do that? How's your brain put the two together?
You hit the nail on the head. The idea is trying to avoid the point of diminishing returns. It doesn't matter if you're a professional runner, a triathlete, a professional cyclist, or an amateur motocross racer. I always like to have, and I would encourage the listeners to do this, draw two circles on your piece of paper and let them overlap ever so closely in the middle. The circle on the left would be undertraining, and the circle on the right would be overtraining.
So a Venn diagram.
Yep. So essentially what ends up happening is both have the same result. They're both counterproductive. The sweet spot in the middle, and this is where you've heard me say publicly here on this podcast, as well as some of the others that I've done, what is the definition of overtraining? Not able to absorb the volume that you're currently doing. So I've got some professional triathletes that train 40 to 45 hours a week, and they're not tired. Their blood work comes back healthy every quarter. They sleep like a baby, et cetera, et cetera. Well, just recently, we had an MXGP rider who reached out to us, and he was under the age of 18. So the dad was on the phone with us, and he's like, my son's tired. And I said, okay, is that because he's overworked or is he under recovered? And it was just a pause. And he says, I never really thought about that way. His son was doing 9 hours a week and was tired. That should tell you something right off the bat to your initial question. When I have a triathlete that can do 40 plus hours and is not tired, you can't tell me that 9 hours is overtrained for a 17-year-old.
Right. So something else is up.
This is where it goes back to without enough food, without enough water, and without enough sleep, you could train 30 minutes a day and be overtrained. Because if you're outside of somebody who's, let's say, under the age of 18, your biggest focus is school, riding, cross training, repeating, right? For the vet riders that we have, it's job, family, just multitude, especially if you have little ones that are riding as well, because you've got your bike prep, you've got their bike prep, to and from the track. There's a lot that goes on. And this is where it goes into managing expectations. I liked what you said in regards to if you have a chance to ride, nothing replaces seat time for sure. But if you're already getting there exhausted, if you're already there prematurely fatigued, this is where I agree with you 100%. Your risk of getting hurt when you swim is a heck of a lot less than getting hurt if your depth perception's off because of low blood sugar, fatigue, dehydration. Your transition from on the gas to the brake, when you mess that up and you blow through the apex of the corner and then you high side, put your hand out because you have bad flexibility in your shoulder, now you blow out your shoulder. Now, let's reverse that whole accident, unfortunately. Your hand is on the ground and you're blowing the head of the humerus through the back of your shoulder joint. Why did that happen? Because you high sided in the left hand turn. Why did you high side? Because your center of gravity got high. And you know this better than anybody, Derek. A motorcycle will always stand up in a corner when it does not have input. Plain and simple. If you want to test the theory, go watch the PW50s in a field. On the gas, off the gas. They look like a bunch of weeble wobbles, right? When you're on the gas, watch the pros, right? They're trail braking the front and the rear at all times, give or take maybe 1%. So if the bike is either being slowed down by the brakes or the rear wheel is pushing it, the frame is always going to be super, super stable. Well, why would a bike go right in a left-hand turn? Because there's a gap somewhere between the gas and the throttle, the gas and the brake and the gas. That nanosecond allows a bike to stand up. You know that better than anybody. That's the world of physics. My question is keep backing this whole situation up. You're hitting the ground. Unfortunately, you have bad flexibility. You don't have a lot of muscle definition, shoulder injury. Back it up. Why are you high siding? The bike had a nanosecond without input. Bike's always going to stand up in a corner. Back that up. Is that a blood sugar issue? Could be. Is that a dehydration, i.e. electrolyte issue? Could be. Or you just outright fatigued before you even got onto the track. You go and you're swimming, and let's say you're swimming 10 by 100, leaving the wall on the 2-minute interval. If you get tired, the worst thing that can happen is you might not make your interval. Okay, no harm, no foul. If you have bad swim stroke, if you don't have a good ratio of strength to flexibility, you might get a little bit of an aggravation in your shoulder, right? You could call it some tendonitis of the shoulder. Well, that's a heck of a different hurt than high siding in a left-hand turn, putting your arm out and blowing your shoulder out. And we've all saw those guys that have gotten hurt doing that.
Right. It happens a lot, right? So
yeah,
to me, I try to tell parents this too, working with this one rider we didn't end up getting to see that to completion with, but a club kid, and he got hurt recently. I don't recall what the injury was. Nothing too big, but he's off the bike. Let's say it's 6 to 8 weeks. I don't know. I don't recall how long it is or whatever. I don't recall the injury either, but
yeah,
whatever it is, it's not a fun injury, right? No injury is fun. And it's enough to be off the bike, not something you can ride through or train through. Not like you can train on the bike through. So you've just lost 8 weeks of your fitness program. You've lost 8 weeks of your bike program. All of these factors, and no matter how hard you train off this injury, right, you've lost something versus had you stayed healthy. And like you said, to me, when you override and you ride too much, the likelihood goes up of injury. And then number two, in addition to that, it goes up statistically, period, right? Just if you're going to crash 1 in 1,000 hours and you get closer to 1,000 hours, okay, you're going to get closer to hurt. So why don't we limit the total hours we're on track to make sure they're super high quality? And then on top of that, let's make sure we're in really good shape and fit and rested and healthy, which is what you're talking about, so that when we do hit the deck, we might bounce right back up. Or we don't even hit the deck because we showed up 100%. And we've all been there. I don't know if, I haven't rode him forever, but I remember showing up some days and something was just off. And we've talked about it on the show. And I don't mean like I slept good or was this, that, but I just was off. You know what I mean? Like how do you, at the top level, how do you show up and win a title day in and day out and not have bad days? Well, they all have bad days. It's minimizing those bad days. But that said, like, you got to identify the days you're a little bit off too. Like, man, I'm just not firing on all cylinders today. Something's not right. Okay, maybe I got to back it down 5% today. Or maybe my plan today of training and workload just ain't going to work. I got to figure it out, but let's go work on something I can work on, something like that, because you got to be smart about that. That's part of it. So on the arm pump side, I agree with you entirely, but yeah, to me, riding too much causes you more headache than riding too little. And granted, they're both bad, but most kids nowadays are watching, anybody who's chasing amateur nationals, they're probably riding plenty. That's probably not their limitation to success or getting better. Would you agree with that?
100%. There's two things that I want to back the train up on and unpack that you just said. when you come to the track and you know you're already tired, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, you're just reinforcing bad biomechanics, period. You're not going to be in the right position. You're not going to be centered over the bike. I find that when people look down at their front fender versus looking far enough ahead, that is a big contributor to body arm pump. Excuse me. That's a contributor to arm pump as well, not just body position, but not looking far enough ahead. Now, a lot of people don't stop and think about, when you get in a car accident, you see the people that have the donut around their neck. Well, when you get hit from behind, and I don't say this to insult anyone's intelligence, but when you're sitting at a light and you get rear-ended from behind, your head goes backwards and it stretches out all the muscles in the front of your neck. Those are called your SCM, big, big words, sternocleidomastoid. They're all the muscles on the front of your neck. Well, because the car went forward and your head's sitting there idle and your head goes back, you overextend your SCM muscles. Now stop and think about when a riding coach asks you to look further ahead. You have to have strength on the back of your shoulders to look up. You have to have the flexibility in the front of the neck to keep your head up while your head bobs with the weight of the helmet, velocity, the track, and all that goes with it. When you talked about coming to a track and you're very fast on a dirt bike, you have a very, very extensive background, but I like the way that you articulated it. I just knew I was off for that day. Okay. Well, this is where I want to unpack two things that you said that are all intertwined. Number one, if you constantly work on your strength, your flexibility, your endurance, and your lactate tolerance, big fancy word for sprint speed, you've always got to stay focused on which of those three are your biggest limiter. If you're out riding on the track and you've got a carbureted bike and it's great down low and then you get about midway and then it starts to bog, what do? You go fix where in that system from idle to wide open is it not working correctly? Well, that's the difference between your sprint speed and your muscular endurance. Think about it as two ends of a bookcase, just for generic purposes. You get to the track and Derek, you're really good on a dirt bike. You've raced at a semi-pro level. You know that you're off for the day. Keep your wheels on the ground. Go find a turning track. Go find a figure eight. Do something that's going to minimize could you get hurt knifing the front end? Of course you could. We just talked about high side in the corner. I understand that. But why not work the statistics to your advantage? You've been at work all day. Unfortunately, food was inconsistent. You've been under a lot of stress. Now, remember we were talking about where the two circles overlap in the middle? This is where biofeedback from the Garmin dashboard is absolutely priceless. Now, I've talked to a lot of ex-pros who are now their sons or daughters, particularly sons, obviously, are racing pro. We don't want to get into analysis paralysis, but we also say numbers don't lie, especially once you get about 6 to 8 months of data on the Garmin dashboard. Because every day that you wear the Garmin heart rate monitor, it's building a better profile. It's a little bit more accurate. It knows, believe it or not, Derek, if you had your Garmin on, and let's say, I know this is going to sound silly, if you go and you get on a lawnmower and you're moving at 35 miles an hour, it's going to give you an activity as if you were on your motorcycle because you've gone past the speed that you run, you swim, and you cycle.
So it knows, right?
It knows. Now, what's interesting about that is when we're looking at the Garmin dashboard on a calorie burn rate, it tells you you're resting versus you're active. Now, we've had people that have big pieces of property. They spend 6 hours on a Saturday mowing they got this huge activity on their dashboard that said you did something pretty physically demanding for 6 hours. You go and you look at their calorie burn rate and it literally categorizes it into active calories. And they were on a lawnmower for 6 hours. But because the lawnmower is fast, it's like, wait a second, are you on your motorcycle? It doesn't have a category for lawnmower. You go, Rob, why would that matter? Well, stress has no boundaries. If you're dehydrated, you're stressed. If you're going through a divorce, you're stressed. If you've got a work environment that's less than ideal, you're stressed. If you have a little one that's teething, you're stressed. Someone steals your motorcycle, you're stressed. See, we think of stressed is somebody's yelling in your face. The body doesn't have that ability.
It's just stress, right?
Stress is very generic. But what's great about the Garmin dashboard is it helps you identify, okay, and we can look at this. We can look at a Garmin dashboard on a per minute basis. So I can say, okay, Derek, you were pretty good until around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. What happened? Oh, I was on the phone with somebody that owes me $7,000 for a motor that they have refused to pay for. Okay. We know the source of the stress. It's when you can't pinpoint what's causing it. That's why I'm such a big fan of the Garmin, because when we talk about that Venn diagram where we want to stay in that sweet spot, your sweet spot could be completely different than Darren Chell.
Right. You said something ages ago that has really stuck with me, and I hope that we get across on the podcast because it stuck with me. So I hope other people grabbed it, which is you can only take as much training as you can accept.
Absorb is the key word.
Absorb, right? You can only
if you can absorb it. Yep.
So at the end of the day, using these metrics, like I don't have it on at the moment. I've been wearing it every day though, and like you said, it's been incredibly accurate as far as like, oh man, I am run down today and whatever, right? And I think that, like you said, I use it as like a supplement to, okay, this is what it said. Okay, how did I sleep last night? What is it? What I think I slept? Okay, what's going on or whatever. But like, man, I'm kind of run down. I'm feeling kind of, let me go double check. Oh yeah, my watch says I'm beat down. Like, okay, I need to work on this. Maybe I need to set aside this weekend to get recovered or whatever. And I think that not using those metrics is dumb, right? So on the side of the arm pump side, I would be willing to bet that if you on your Garmin app were low body battery and it showed some poor sleep and you hadn't quite hydrated right, you hadn't slept well, and you were training a bunch and go to the track and you're wondering why your performance sucked, all those signs are right there for you.
You live in a motor world. I want all the listeners. You've got a Garmin heart rate monitor, and every indicator that we look at, HRV is out of balance. HRV stands for heart rate variability, which is a number that we use to see how rested you are. You can look at your resting heart rate. Shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 beat deviation every day. We can look at body weight. We can look at resting heart. We can look at a multitude. I said resting heart rate twice. I apologize. We can look at, as you mentioned, body battery. We can look at how much you bounced back. If you started your day at 100, your body battery went down to a 25 yesterday, were you able to get it back up to 100? If not, we need to know why. Now, for some of the moto dads that grew up in the era that you and I did, no pain, no gain, sleep is what you do when you die, and all this other stuff. Because you live in the world of motors, I want somebody to stop and think about, you and I go and we buy a brand new bike and we go to Millville and we ride it in second gear and we do 4 20-minute motos, right? It's only got 80 minutes on it, but that's a hard 80 minutes if all we did was ride the bike in second gear. Now it's got bold new graphics. The hour meter only shows that you've got an hour and 20 minutes on it, right? Doesn't matter. How much stress did you put that bike under? So if I can get the listeners to think about, well, of course you're going to switch gears. Why? So you don't blow the bike up. You're looking at the hour meter and it now has 100 hours on it. This is the no pain, no gain. So you're going to look at that hour meter. You keep throwing bold new graphics on it, right? And you start calling the hour meter a pansy. You need to push through. You need to toughen up. This is ridiculous. We have a Loretta Lynn's championship. We got to go. Is that going to make the motor all of a sudden deliver more power because you called it names? You threatened it with your life? Now, as ridiculous as that sounds, right? Then we come into the human performance side. You've got an elevated heart rate. HRV is out of balance. Body battery's in the drain. Appetite suppressed. Sleep score is horrible. Deep sleep is almost non-existent. How many more variables do you need? It's like that hour meter that just has simply a number. 103 hours are on it. And you're going to just kind of dismiss it and say, well, toughen up. Let's push. It's only a number.
And I think this goes
as foolish as it sounds.
It's dumb, right? You put it in great terms. You can't, you put it perfectly. And I think what I think parents should take away is realistically using those metrics, using a guy like you essentially is saying that to be good on race day means a kid needs to have all those metrics right on race day morning, or that guy, right? But the kid needs to be right on race day morning. And how do you do that? Well, that starts going backwards from there. That was the right sleep and the right training and not over, not under, and looking and listening to your body. And like, if you got a big race coming up and you're really trying to get ready and you overdo it going in, that's a whole of a lot worse than if you came in and a little bit more rested or a little bit more hydrated. Or, Phil said this on Pulp. I think you and I talked about it. Caden Brattles, I don't, I'm not speaking for him because I don't know, but from what we gathered and debrief a year later, his rookie year, Phil said something like, you go, if you ride, Phil is a bigger guy. So you're trying to come in the 250F class at a certain weight to be competitive. He's like, I would come in at my lean and mean, boiling down what I heard on Pulp, come in lean and mean for him. But throughout the season, I would gain weight. And that was intentional. I'm not trying to stay lean or lose weight in season or, be tired or no. I'm okay if I gain a couple pounds in season because that means I'm eating enough. I'm getting enough calories. I'm doing it right. And I thought, meanwhile, here was Caden his rookie year losing weight and sick and couldn't get healthy and couldn't get, all these things. And you're trying to race every weekend and line it up. Well, it's a long ass season. You know what I mean? So wow, it should have been nice to take some of that advice and be like, maybe I should have not, and granted, that was a lack of the proper preparation early in the season of, hey, we need to come in at the weight we need to kind of want to be at the beginning of the year with the right prep and plan towards that weight so that when the season starts, we're not tired, we're not whatever, but we're lean and mean, and then we can just recover. We can be good the whole year. And I thought Phil was dead on about that. But like you're saying, on race day, if all your metrics are bad that morning of race day, A, you can't fix it. Today's not going to fix it. And B, that really stemmed from poor preparation. You really knew. You knew when the race was. You know what your metrics are. You know what you got to do to get them right because you've been training and looking at these metrics. So all the signs are there. And I having used the Garmin now for about a year or however long we've been doing this, I can say it's shockingly accurate, right? Like it's amazingly good at picking up on what you're doing. Like you said, I mean, it knows you better than you do when it comes to your sleep metrics and how you feel and all these things. It's phenomenal. So, and like, I'd ask you these questions off record, like what should my heart rate variation be? And I asked that because one day, you wake up and it's like, oh, your resting heart rate was 6 beats higher than it normally is last night. And you're like, oh, whatever. It's like, no, that's not normal, so something was up, and so it's like, okay, well, I do feel kind of shitty today, so that's kind of the.
Well, you just mentioned two things that are very important to back up once again. So good job. Number one is when we're talking about the Garmin, it's not about just using it as if you're looking for a reason not to train. That's not what we're insinuating. Because if it's the morning of Loretta's, it's day one, it's Tuesday morning, and your numbers are in the tank, unfortunately, it just didn't work out. Unfortunately, no matter how hard you try, how many people do you know get sick how many people get sick Monday at Loretta's? A good 5-6%, even maybe as upwards of 10%. I've seen people. And there's two reasons why I wanted to back up what you just said, because we use the Garmin, and I want the attention of the parents. We use the Garmin heart rate monitor as an accountability tool. And we'll come back to that here in a second when the racing begins. But you made a comment. It's always better to come in 1% undertrain versus 1% overtrain. Always, 100%. And we say with all of our athletes, you're never going to gain any fitness and speed the last 7 to 14 days before a high profile race.
Have we not talked
and yet, shit, oh yeah. But you can bet the last dollar you have in your bank account that as we get closer to Loretta's, there will be people grinding up to the Friday before they get to.
I know people every year, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Every year.
We got to get this train in. We got to ride. We got to this. And then like,
it's too late.
Half the time, not half the time, but a lot of these people get hurt. I'm like, you got hurt how many days ago? Oh, 7 days ago. I'm like,
yep.
You knew Loretta's was coming up, right? Well, we were trying to I'm like, did you not want to go? Like, I'd rather sit on the couch for 3 weeks to make sure I go to Loretta's, if that was my focus, than go get hurt. Like,
well, that's where skills and drills, keep your wheels.
Yes, exactly.
Wheels in the ground. Turn for dough, jump for show, right?
You hear that buddy of mine's philosophy? I think I told it on the show. He was Ryan Grantham, super fast amateur. I don't know where he lives now. I think he's in New Mexico, but he was out of Austin forever. One of the most gifted guys on a dirt bike he's like a Kevin Wyndham you never heard about, kind of, sort of, not that good, but he legitimately challenged Villapoto through amateurs for titles. Okay. So like very, very good Suzuki kid. Didn't pan out, but that's another. He got an engineering degree, kind of rookie year, made every main, quit, became an engineer, then got back into it. So while he was at school, no health insurance, no money, all these things, he should not be riding a dirt bike, but he loves dirt bikes. And he goes out and he's riding, and he had a 5 and 15 rule. No higher than 5 feet above the ground and no faster than 15 miles an hour. And his philosophy was, and he's an engineer, he's not dumb, was, well, human body can run 15 miles an hour pretty consistently, and it can fall from how high it stands, 5 feet, and usually does survive. So as long as I stick to my 5 and 15 rule when I don't have health insurance, and he would find tight little tracks and little things he would make. He would make little custom things so that he could stay within his threshold. And he's still, even when he was doing that and he's not really on his game and not training, he's still the fastest dude in the area. Like, he was by far the best rider doing 5 and 15. So like you said, I agree with that.
Well, and here's where what you mentioned has a second dynamic to it, right? The accountability. If your son or daughter is flat on race day, that tells me that, and it's gonna sound like an oxymoron, most people train too hard on their easy days.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, when it comes time to do the higher quality work, which, by the way, should only be about 2 days a week of high intensity work, even on the motorcycle. And I get ostracized for this every time I bring it up. I didn't create the principles of physiology, but I do want to share it with our listeners. The sooner you listen to it and the sooner you adhere to it, the longer you're going to reap the benefits from it. I didn't make these principles up. This is the facts of physiology, right? So when you recognize it takes 6 months to build an aerobic engine, you've got facilities and trainers and moto parents that are having their kids grind, right? You have all these short qualifiers through June. Now all of a sudden we got to moto down. We got to get all these long motos in. All you're doing is wearing your athlete out before you even get there, or you yourself as an athlete. But here's where the accountability comes in. When your athlete is training, and we work with specific heart rate ranges, which are specific to the individual on the motorcycle. Well, if I'm asking for a 20-minute moto, we actually have our athletes go up to 35 minutes to get ready for Loretta's. It's another story for another day as to why, but just trust me, it works. So it's actually called the overload principle. So we get our athletes to go for 35 minutes to be able to dominate a 20-minute race. Well, as much as the moto parents hate to hear this and the trainers like to argue with me on this, there's an inverse relationship between intensity and volume. If you're bringing the volume up to 30 minutes, particularly for an amateur, you've got to bring the intensity down. What does that do? It builds athletic durability without wearing and tearing the body down. It's like I was saying earlier, if you go out and you ride a bike brand new, but you only ride it in second gear at Millville with elevation and all those high-speed sections, yes, it's only 80 minutes, as we said earlier. You did 4 20-minute motos. The hour meter only shows an hour and 20 minutes. The stress that's non-visible is the part that's going to grenade the motor. So now you take that to the human performance side, you do have enough variables with the Garmin dashboard that will show you that there's that the Garmin elements will illustrate to you that the body's excessively stressed.
Well,
where your
great
heart
example,
meter
right?
isn't to it.
Let's take two vehicles. One that's been a pavement princess highway truck that just had to go up and down the highway all the time, not hauling anything. Just had a car that went, 100,000 miles a year, 5 years, 500,000 mile Toyota Camry. Or you take that same exact car that was a taxi cab. Which one do you want to buy with 500,000 miles? The one that was just cruising along at a low RPM up and down the highway, nothing hard, or the one that was accelerating hard, stopping hard, over potholes, and the whole 9 yards. Same thing applies to your body, right? You can do a lot of low intensity, long duration stuff.
Here's what comes interesting though. When we go racing, if you as a parent, we know that you're through historical data, we know that your athlete races, and I'm going to use a random heart rate range. We know that they can race between 183 and 190. And then because Derek, this is where it comes back to your wheelhouse. If the athlete can't get the heart rate into the range that we know, and we've tested it, we've trained it, we've tested it, we've trained it, we get to a high profile race and the athlete cannot get into that race intensity, that's where we go back to the bike's not balanced. Something is wrong with setup, not an excuse. Mom and dad, heart rate monitors can help you figure out when your rider is not comfortable with the bike. But this is what, Derek, this whole show is all about. Please have your athlete articulate what's going on. Why can't you get your heart rate into the intensity levels that we know you're capable of? Because we've seen it before. But right now, stop and think about it. Your max heart rate number isn't going to change Monday through Friday. So if last Thursday we had open practice and you're out there and we're doing some moto simulations, right? And you get in that 185 to 190 range, and then you can't hit that a week, 5 days later, a week later, because the athlete's not comfortable enough. And you've talked a lot about this on the show, Derek. A lot of the pros, one of the things they're big on is the predictability. They get so comfortable. They can anticipate what the bike's going to do because the way it flexes, the way it accelerates, the way it's set up.
People don't grasp. So let's get on the bike a little bit. I know it's something that we wanted to talk about, which is no pro's bike is perfect. It's just perfect for him. And it's not usually perfect for him, right? They're always bitching about something. But at the end of the day, if they know that, I'm going to hit this bump and it's going to kick a little left and I'm going to move my body, and they do that ahead of time, then you don't even see it happen because they just know it's going to happen. It's predictable. And that's kind of the right. And that's the key that makes them really good. And so that's more important for your athlete than the best suspension. You could have the worst suspension on the planet. If your kid knew everything it was going to do and he was in tune with that, he could ride it pretty good because humans are really adaptable. Whereas if you took that same kid who had, let's just say he had bone stock suspension, but he put 100 hours on it, he kept it serviced, it was in good shape, and he was about the right weight, right? Then you said, you know what? It's right before Loretta's. We got to get my kid some suspension. And you go to the best suspension company there is, and you order it, and you send it out, and you get it back, and things were delayed, which always happens. And it comes in, and you put it on. You didn't get 1 day to ride the damn thing. And you go to Loretta's. And then in practice, it's one version of a track. where they have all that sand on the track and it's loose and it's soft and it's every damn bike category back to back to back to back. And every kid's racing for a lap time, which is the stupidest thing ever. And then, they're trying to set their stamp on it in the week in practice, right? Which is fine. But and then that's the first time on the bike. And the kid comes in, he's like, Dad, I'm really struggling out there. And you're like, well, what? We got the best suspension. And then all week long, the track changes every day. The dirt changes, the prep changes, the weather changes, your moto time changes. They intentionally do that typically. You typically are at different times during the day, every day. So you never know what you're going to get. Early morning moto, smooth as silk, but muddy. And late in the day is drier, rougher, and slicker and more square edgy. And late in the week, it gets more and more hard and all these factors. And you're just chasing your ass all week. You're turning the clicker left. You're turning the clicker right. You're over your suspension company. You're bitching and pissing and moaning. The kid's unhappy. You'd have been better off just riding that junky ass stock suspension because he knows it because of the proprioceptive balance side of things. So even if his suspension was better, he just didn't know it. And you just see this time and time again. And everybody does the same thing. I mean, I hate to say it. I'm not calling anybody out in a negative way, but they get all their bikes done for Loretta's and it's all new motor and all new suspension. And half the time it's a new bike and all these things. And they don't have any time on them. Well, it's my race bike. I can't wear it out. Well, yes, but no. You're not going to be good on it, and we told that story on this show about Braswell's dad. I mean, he just, he bought him this sweet 85 for Loretta's. And this is actually when he had a breakout year. He won like everything that year. He won everything, every class. He went to what do they call it? The FIM World Junior Championships, won everything by 30 seconds over every guy. All the guys winning GPs today in the US, had a killer year. His shows up with a new race bike, rides practice. Kid goes, Dad, he's real quiet. That bike ain't no good. What? I got a motor and I got suspension. It's brand new. I just bought that thing. I spent a fortune on it. Bike ain't no good. All right. Go put all the graphics and plastic on his practice total beat up hammered bike. And that's when I won all those titles. It's because he was comfortable. The bike was good. Had you given him 10 hours, he'd have been happy. But he had been beaten up. That was a year I'm sure he was riding a lot, beating up that practice bike, so he just knew everything about that bike. And that's way more important than who does your suspension, how good it is or isn't. I had this on the other show. You had a little clip I saw, I think on Instagram or something, about me talking about suspension hasn't changed technology in like 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
I really should do this for YouTube. I'll do it. I probably have some 20-year-old stuff sitting around. We'll tear it all apart and we'll tear apart a brand new motorcycle and put it side by side. And you'd be like, huh? But they say they're better. Well, they still got 12 inches of travel. That hasn't changed in 40 years. They got 21 19s. That hasn't changed. They got 2 wheels. They got 2 tires. That hasn't changed. They got a motor. That hasn't changed. So they've gotten better, right? But at the end of the day, the suspension's not better. It's just evolved in chassis and evolved in settings. And really, our sport has evolved stiffer, by the way. You can add some questions on that. But our sport has evolved stiffer. Production bikes are way stiffer than they ever were. I mean, way stiffer. I think it's because the bikes are so fast. The demographic has changed a lot. Like, think about bike track prep. Could you imagine what would happen with today's market on the tracks you probably grew up on and the tracks I grew up on, where they didn't water for a month and the track was just square edge, chuck hold, hard pack, terrible? Like, that was a good day of practice.
I'm going to show my age. I do not remember ever hearing somebody bitch about the track.
Yeah,
never.
Right? I grew up, I'm like, hey, it's open.
Yeah, I had a 78 RM80, steel, 2 dual suspension in the back made out of steel, with a metal tank to wrap your balls on.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I never, ever, we used to ride in the orange groves and run from the police officers. And if we had a little bit of, there was moisture in it because they watered the trees, you get a nice berm that would develop. People would say it was nicer, but when it was a dust bowl, nobody complained. We were riding our dirt bikes.
So the bikes have evolved because now the tracks are groomed all the time. They're not that rough. They're faster because the bikes are faster and the tracks themselves have evolved to accommodate the bikes and the size of jumps. I mean, go ride a 125. I don't care how much you glorify them and how much you like them. Go ride one and you'll be like, I don't know how people can ride those things. They're so slow. And it's like, the modern 125s are the best they ever were. So that's what was a normal bike for everybody. So the jumps have gotten bigger, the tracks are faster, they're groomed, they're watered, they're prepped. So the suspension's gotten stiffer because you go out on tracks that have bigger jumps that are faster, that are smoother. But if the track's really rough and nasty and this and that, they end up being really stiff. And so, of course, now we're talking about, the chassis, the this, that, the other. And that's true, too. The chassis have gotten stiffer. The old bikes were just noodles. Yeah. But one thing they did really well was absorb that square edge, choppy, nasty, chattery. And then we didn't have jumps that were that big. Because if you built a jump like they had today back then, you would snap your bike in half. So the tracks are like, yeah, we're not going to build that. Nobody would be stupid enough to jump it anyway. And so the difference is now, all these factors, but it's definitely, it contributes to why you have arm pump, all these factors. And so then now you have to pick a compromise, which is, I don't know if I used this analogy on the show before about suspension. I've been meaning to bring it up. I'm sure I have used it, but if you threw an egg and I had to catch it, okay, just the most basic of things, and you had a hell of an arm, you could throw it at any speed, right? And so we started playing catch with it, and you started just lobbing it into me, and I could catch that real easy. And you started picking up the pace, right? Well, naturally, I would have to kind of start catching the egg, right? I couldn't just grab it, and I couldn't just kind of like not do it right. I'd have to start catching the egg, right? And like kind of guiding it into my hand because it has a threshold of which it's going to snap. Well, your suspension only has 12 inches. I only have my arm's reach to catch the egg. That's all I have, which is about the same amount. So how do you want to catch it? Well, that's where your suspension comes into play, right? So we can have our suspension that can take that real fastball of an egg. Well, that's if you're a fast rider. But that suspension setup's a hell of a lot different to be nice and cushy and soft and whatever. If I want to catch that little softball lobbed egg throw, right? It might break right when it touches my hand because I'm not giving enough initially, right? So that's the difference. In suspension, the same thing. It's 12 inches of travel. We have basic physics. We can only absorb so much energy in 12 inches. How do you want to absorb it?
Yeah, but you bring up something that's really important, and that's the absorption of energy. Once you blow through the full stroke, front and back, right? Now your human body becomes the receiver of what's left. You have a big, like you call it, a big flatland, or you have like the jump that goes into the sand section at Loretta's as they come into the water area around by the finish line jump. You listen to the bikes. You and I last year, we were in the lookout tower, right? And you could hear those bikes.
Yep.
And we were, 400 yards away from it. And you could just hear the ground hit as they would send it over, and they would miss that little divot at the bottom, and especially the 125s, you could hear them. The thing that I find so interesting, and this is where I want the parents to be encouraged, when we're talking about the Garmin heart rate monitor, it's like it's like an F1 Formula race car dashboard. We can look at your average speed. We can look at your athlete's average heart rate, their max heart rate, the calorie burn rate. If we weigh them before and after, we know their sweat rate. You start looking at all that, and then we get with somebody like Derek about, was the bike set up like, Derek, you blew my mind last year when we were at Loretta's, because I'm asking you, what do you see? We were sitting there where they came by the mechanics area and took a right and went in. And I remember when Andrew Short, went around that little molehill by the mechanics, just made a big S turn out of it, came out, went past the mechanics, went around that little molehill, went to the right, came right up next to the fence line, went right across everybody's ruts, and then right into that back section. When you and I just looked at each other and we're just shaking our heads. I'm like, what do you see the suspension's doing that Andrew's bike is that no one else isn't? You went through a whole diatribe of stuff. What I want the parents to really listen to, and especially the vet riders, the bike is giving some kind of feedback. You blow through the stroke. I like your egg analogy where it's okay when it's nice and soft and the lobs are easy and they're pretty close. But when they start to become a little bit more aggressive and they're back to back to back, if somebody were throwing a dozen eggs at you and you're trying to capture each one of them, that's what your body's stuck in the middle. You're trying to twist the throttle. Your brain's trying to process the speed, and the muscles are stuck in the middle because the brain keeps saying, I want to win, right? And I always tease about this. The brain's like, I want to be a champion. The muscles are like, screw you. We got to do the work. And so that's where you get into a parent teacher conference now, marrying up the way the bike handles, make it supple, make it to where it does its job, i.e. keep the rear wheel on the ground, hooking up when it's supposed to, absorb what it's supposed to. Well, eventually that energy is going to go through the bike and ends up in the athlete. So
you nailed it, right? So it's the balance of arm pump. So if you're getting arm pump, the faster you go. And it's always the same thing, man, these braking bumps, as soon as I go really hard and I really charge my pace, the bike's all over the place. It gets real harsh. It's real stiff. And you come back in, and you're telling everybody it's real stiff. Well, hey, get your damn iPhone out. They're free, not literally, but everybody has one, or your Android. They got slow-mo version, and get somebody to video it for you. This is what you should be doing in practice. Like, you should be getting better,
does it,
and you should be having somebody else help get you your bike better. And go video it. I mean, when I first started doing suspension, that's how I started learning. Back then, they didn't have iPhones like they do today. And so I had to go buy good camera equipment, and I was high speed in camera because I didn't have the money to do the data boxes back then. And the technology was way, we're talking 20 years ago now. It was a lot more expensive technologically to do high speed data. So at the end of the day, do that. And if you start to say, oh, wow, man, I get through the travel all the way, and it's real. I mean, you're going to use your suspension travel. That's desirable, right? But at the end of the day, it's like, man, I hit one bump and then all the way down, and the rear's real tall, the bike's going, and then I hit the bump, and the front has nowhere to go, and it bottoms, and the back kicks up. Well, you're too soft in the front, and yes, oh, but every time I go stiffer with my clicker, I don't like it over there. Well, where do you want to be good?
Give
And
some,
then
get some.
give some to get some. You have to pick. And that means knowing your bike. Okay, the bumps get big. This is a really fast braking bump section. I just cannot charge as hard in to get through that section. I have to back off my pace a little bit to go faster overall through this section and to not get arm pump. Because I guarantee you, when you're bottomed out on that front fork and the ass end's kicking you over the front, you're going to get arm pump. And on the vice versa, that your bike's super stiff in the front, you ran supercross forks by accident on an outdoor day, and all of a sudden, every time you hit a bump, the front end doesn't move. And it just jackhammers straight into your hands, like the egg analogy, right? So there's two ways to catch the egg. Well, it's one to guide it in and catch it. And there's one to like kind of be hard and prevent it from coming in. But if it's too hard, it snaps the egg. Well, that's your hands, it's your body. And think about the impulse strength. You know, if I push on my hand, it's like no impact. But if I do that, it kind of stings, right? It's like, okay, well, that's what happens when you have way too stiff of a fork. Most people don't have way too stiff of a fork this day and age. It's pretty rare. You really got to be out of left field to have done that. But if your kid's 120 pounds, moved up to the big bike, you probably do. And then the other thing is the balance front and back. That's the number one thing. So Chad Reed said this years ago, and I owned a Cowie at the time, and I think this is when he had switched to Cowies. And I had been fighting this on that damn bike, and it took me a while to get it to where I wanted it. I really liked the action of the shock on the G-outs, the whoops, things that were important to me. I never liked it on braking bumps. I could live with it. It would dance left and right a little bit. It just never was great. But the forks I had really good. Anytime I'd go any other which way, I didn't like them anywhere. Like they were great. They took everything the way I wanted them. I'd worked really hard at them. I loved them. And he said in some interviews, like, at the time, I don't know if this is what his feelings are today, said the production bike is just too damn soft on the forks and it's too damn stiff on the shock because it's geared towards an average Joe who doesn't put his head forward in the corner, doesn't stick his leg out correctly, he's not flexible, isn't an elite athlete. And so they're helping him corner. They're saying, hey, get the front end sucked up. It's like putting your head forward. Hey, get the rear tall so the bike can get through the corner. And they're helping you. But unfortunately, the faster you, and then of course, for the slower guys who are not the best jumpers, they're going to case jumps. They have the shock a little stiff. So you can kind of case it and you feel okay and it's good. But Chad said, first thing I do is turn the shock all the way out and the forks all the way in, and then I can go ride the production bike. And I was like, man, that's what I really been having to do to get my bike to work. I've been having the forks, I had valved and got stiffer and great. And I've been really going in circles on the shock. But ultimately, I had to make that choice, which is why I really want to get through these bumps and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to have to sacrifice some of these big G outs once in a blue moon. And what happens when I started learning, I was like, well, how the hell are these fast guys doing it? These guys faster than me, like they're hitting them fat. Well, they were getting better on top of the bump. They weren't letting themselves get down into that G out. Better technique, better form, better riders, more talent, right? So that's the suspension game. It's like, I love the back-to-back analogy you had. If I had to catch a bunch of eggs in a row and I only had one hand to do it, well, the setting has to be perfect. And if you got a bunch of bumps in a row, the faster you go through those bumps, the stiffer and faster that rebound needs to be. And the slower you go through those bumps, the softer and slower your forks can be. And the same with your shock. So you just nailed it on the head. And then of course that balance, if the shock's too stiff, overpowers the forks. If the forks are too stiff, it can overpower your shock and create that really brutal feedback because your forks are just not moving. And then, man, I can't even describe, I heard this the other day. How many of these, we should have brought this up on show 1. I don't know why I didn't think of it. How often do people get their forks back from the suspension company? They install it themselves, or their local buddy did, and they didn't do it, and they have the axle in a bind. It happens all the time. I get bikes that come through the shop all the time that are this way, and I'm like, hey, and it's so funny. They'll go spend all this money on suspension somewhere and be like, I totally love it. And I'm like, okay, cool, man. Just put fork seals in it and don't touch anything. I'm like, yeah, no problem. I don't know why they're leaking. It only leaked in 2 hours. I'm like, oh, that is weird. Dude, I don't care who installs your fork seals. It's like a monkey could do it. The shop didn't screw up. So you go in there and you undo their axle nut and go to do their pinch bolts, and the fork's all pink, sticks out. And you're like, and then you pull it apart and the bushing's all worn out on one side because the fork was in a bind and canted. Well, then it won't go up and down in your tube. Your fork's twice as stiff as it's supposed to be. Like you can feel it. You're pushing on the bike and it's like, dude, his forks are stuck. Like they don't move. And then he's, I love my suspension. You take it all apart, you put the seals, you put the bushings fluid in, you put it on, you get it right. And you're like telling him like, hey, did you put your forks on? Yeah, I did. I'm like, okay, like you just got them back, but you love it. Oh, dude, I spent 1,500. They're sweet. I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, I think they're going to be even better now. Oh, why is that? Well, just go ride it. And hey, by the way, when you tighten up your forks, this is how you do it. This is how it should look. Oh, I didn't know. Nobody told me that. Okay. They go ride it. Dude, forks are awesome, awesome. You know, and you're like, dude, they had to be so bad before. You just couldn't
Yeah,
accept
exactly.
that.
Yep.
That's something else. If your kid's at Loretta is swapping his wheels out because you took him over to Dunlop to go get your new tires and you didn't quite do all that right, or your axle's worn out because you've been beating it in with the hammer, all of a sudden your forks can't line up correctly. And now you're in a bind and your suspension's stiff. How often do you think that happens? Because you know how many bikes I've seen at Loretta's that way?
A lot.
Half of them that I've touched.
Yep. So let's talk about the elephant in the room and rip the scab off and put some alcohol in it. Everyone wants the fast motor, and now the belly button is stuck behind the pegs because now they're hanging on for dear life like Superman because we had to buy the fire-breathing dragon, of which, like you said earlier, we don't get time to ride it because we don't want to wear it out, which I'm sorry, and I hope that this doesn't come across the wrong way. There's factory teams that build a bike that's designed to go an hour. Most amateur programs, and correct me if I'm wrong, so I'm not an engineer, but I don't think that there's many families that are buying a bike that's designed to only go 1 hour. So let's just say, and again, you correct me on the specificity of number. Let's say you buy a bike that's designed to be rebuilt every 10 hours. You're only putting 3 20-minute motos and maybe 2 practice sessions. What would you say on the high side? That's going to be 2 hours,
Yeah.
2 hours and 15. You have plenty of time to break it in, ride it for a couple hours, and still make it through Loretta's and have another 2 hours on the backside. If we're
So
losing,
I had a client years ago that we, really got this right with. And then I've tried to shape all future clients with this, which is he built a really nasty race bike. And he built decent practice bikes. He didn't have a big budget, but they had enough to do pretty good, but nothing like his race bike. But in reality, he raced spring nationals and Loretta's on it. I don't think he raced regionals. He might have done one class on it at regionals. And for the entire year, he had 10 hours on his motorcycle. Like
his race bike.
Yeah.
Race bike.
But that allowed some practice time too. Think about it. I mean, spring nationals, you've got one mod class, maybe two, and you've got
6 minutes of racing.
Yeah. So even if it was 15s or whatever they are, right? Like you're going to get max. You ride practice day on the bike. You rode. So let's say you put an hour on it before spring nationals. And then you put on an hour on it on practice at spring nationals, which would be a lot. You're not going to get that time.
It is a lot.
And you do your races. So let's say you got a total of 3 hours at one of the spring nationals plus the practice. And then you do the other one, you got 2 more hours. You got 5. And then you go race the regional and do the day of practice on it. You get 2 practices in that class. And a lot, it's up to you, but obviously you should probably also ride your limited class bike if you have that. So you're only going to get one practice session, maybe 2, 20 minutes, right? You do that. So you got another hour. So let's call it 2 more hours. You're at 7. And then you show up and so before Loretta's, you put an hour on it. You put your 20-minute practice on it. And then you do your hour at Loretta's and you're sub 10 hours for the whole year. Now, most of these race engines we build are not 10 hours to full rebuild.
Okay.
Like they're 10 hours to you need to do some stuff, but like a low end is usually going to go beyond that. Now you can spend the money if you want, and sometimes it's advisable, but at the end of the day, realistically, if everything goes right and we do it right, we should be able to go 10 hours, do timing chain, maybe some valve train stuff, a piston, if it's a 4-stroke, piston kit.
Sure.
That's the expensive side of things. But 2-strokes are way, way more simple. And you could go, so I have a client right now doing it this year. They did 10 hours on a race bike. Now it's we did a freshen up on it, just a piston kit, go through the valve train, look at everything. Everything looks good. Look at the clutch, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, all right, you're trying to take it to Loretta's and regionals. Regionals is your Loretta's for you because he hasn't made Loretta's last year. So it's like, hey, this is your Loretta's. So I want you to show up with 3 hours or 4 hours on that bike before the regional. I want you to be 100% on it. You better have no excuses on suspension, which you had earlier in the year. You better have no excuses on because you're prepared. And then if you make it, great. You still got a couple hours. You can go to Loretta's. We're totally within the realm of that motorcycle. And realistically, you're going to transition that bike into next year. With their budget, they're going to keep the bike for next year and use it as their good race practice bike. Their good local race, good practice. And then eventually, if they make Loretta's this year, then you buy maybe another race bike. But at the end of the day, now you're sitting on for next year, sitting on a fresh 20-hour bike that was race maintained, right? It's perfect. So it's hell for some of these kids. That's where the chassis, they seem to be happiest at. I'm not saying everybody, but, so certainly, but if you're showing up on brand new stuff, unless your kid's riding brand new stuff all the time, you're cycling through new equipment, you're probably going to be, in the hurt locker for the whole year. So yeah. And then of course, get your suspension right. I mean, even if, like I told them, I'm like, take the suspension off that bike. It may not be the race bike, but go ride it on your practice bike so that you're comfortable on it and you really have shaken it down. Otherwise, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. I mean, I'd rather ride my full mod bike on my old worn out practice suspension that I have hours on than stuff I've never touched, personally. So
it makes sense. So how do you address, and I've got my biases towards this.
Yeah, of course.
Let me set the scenario, and then I want to see what your perspective is as a suspension specialist. When we look at somebody who goes through Daytona, they go through Spring Nationals, they go through areas, no arm pump whatsoever, no problems whatsoever. Bike doesn't change very much. They've got a good rotation of motors, suspension's maintained, known to get very good starts. And we get to where the depth of the competition starts to stack up a little bit. And all of a sudden now the number one complaint by the rider is arm pump. Okay, you never had arm pump in practice. You didn't have any arm pump early spring nationals, pretty much the same bike, same platform, same suspension maintenance. It just seems to me such an easy, convenient, I got arm pump. And then as a physiologist, I can't speak for you as an engineer. As a physiologist, well, you got to fix it, Rob. I'm like, but it's our first time encountering it. Now, this mom and dad is where the accountability comes in with heart rate. If I've seen your athlete, I'll use the same number we said earlier for even numbers. Let's say your athlete can race between 185 and 190. Very loose numbers. He or she can do a 20-minute, 25-minute moto, less than a 2-second, 1 second preferably, but up to a 2-second deviation, 20 minutes, let's say 10 laps. No arm pump. Same motor, same suspension. The rider comes in and says, I got arm pump. Now, to me, it's just an excuse. What's your thoughts?
It could be, right? I mean, sometimes they really did. Once you get it, it's the worst, right? How do you get out of it? But that should be something you train through, by the way. I think you should try to get it in practice occasionally, and then you should figure out how to manage it. Okay, how do I get rid of this? Take a breath.
How did you create it?
Yeah, how did I get here?
If you tell me that you want to make yourself endure it, taking your thread of thought, I want to know, you got to be able to come off the track and tell me what you did to invoke it.
Right.
Because then when you're 10 minutes into a 20-minute moto, you are putting a death grip.
Well,
you are too far back, too far.
Constantly fighting arm pump, but you never in practice, then you're not practicing right.
Well, that's where the accountability of the heart rate monitor, I think, we've used it to break a lot of arm pump. I think psychosomatic.
But because I experienced arm pump racing, right?
Oh, no, I'm not saying it's not real. I find it interesting that you can't get it in training and you don't get it in 50% of your races. But then when it really comes down to the nuts and bolts in the race, i.e. Loretta's, now miraculously,
I think
you have
a huge part of it is lack of replication of condition. So not just track condition, but like the nerves, the starting gait, your heart rate, your breathing. So how many people don't breathe on lap one? And they, some people are cool as a cucumber under pressure and some are not. And they get to this big pressure and this big stage and they're sitting on the line and they're at 165 already. And at a local race, they might be at 130 or 140, right?
But here's what I don't understand. You find out your wife's pregnant. You don't wait till the day she goes in to get ready to have a baby.
No. So I'm just saying
like the race. But I'm saying the race date of Loretta, to your point exactly, Loretta's race date doesn't change. It's always the first week in August, right?
Yeah.
And yet people will go there and act like they're surprised it's hot and humid.
I agree entirely, right?
So that's where I'm kind of curious about what your thoughts are.
I mean, it could be a totally excuse. Kid lied or whatever. Or B, he might have
seems like a very easy excuse to say the suspension sucks.
Oh, yeah. I agree. Well, here's we didn't get to this earlier. So we did not get to this. I don't care how bad your suspension is. Your job is to go race and be successful. So you need to go race and be successful. On the bike,
did you have some riders that struggled with the suspension and still made it work?
So we talked about this, I think, but if not, and I'm not throwing the suspension companies out of the bus. The problem was partly him. Caden Browser last year, his first year, loved his bike. He was younger. He didn't know any better. And I was probably a great bike. And then, he had it good. The next year he gets on the gas from the KTM and there were differences, right? And he just struggled all year. He'd gained some weight, gained some size, arguably gained some speed, right? And for whatever reason, he just all year long didn't like the bike. It was like, it's the suspension just ain't right. And we didn't do it for him. He was working with a local Florida guy and then that ran its course because he was unhappy. Typical, right? Oh, I'm unhappy. So then they go chase and they're with like all the companies, right? And they ended up at one of the big prominent players right now in the space right now, a new company, but like really came to prominence the last couple of years. ends up there, and you should have behind the scenes hated it. But his dad's like, dude, we've spent all this freaking money with every damn suspension company. This is quote unquote the best shit money can buy. I'm spending crazy money, and he's done a lot of work for you. I mean, the guy was sending sets and doing a lot for him. He's like, you're fucking riding it. And so, like, I ain't spending another dime on this shit. And we talked about this, but he goes and rides a stock bike back to back a couple weeks before Loretta's to his full race with suspension. He was the same lap time. And on a, Florida sand training, rough track, like brutal. And, he's, what the hell are we spending all this money for? And he's like, oh, it just handles so good. And he's like, I just never have to let off. Like and he's like, well, what the hell have I been doing? Because he's been listening to the kid. It's too soft here and this, that, the other, and just rode a bone stock bike. And he's like, it's slow, but it handles good. And so basically at the regional, we had a conversation, and I'm like, look, Caden, you're not looking your best, and you're bitching about the bike every time you come off the track. You win a moto at the regional, you get fifth. You're supposed to be a Loretta's champ. We don't get fifth at regionals unless you're just trying to get fifth. You should be winning this by a mile today. There's nobody here you can't beat. And you prove that because you win one, and then you go get fifth. Oh, the bike. And then I'm like, so we leave the race, and I was like, all right, he'd been hurt all year. I'm like, dude, you're not, like, Loretta's is going to go really bad. We got a month. What the hell are you going to do? Like, this ain't working. And I'm like, so all my advice was, look, dude, whatever you got, whatever your bike is, whatever, that's the bike you got. From now to Loretta's, just hammer it out, ride what you got, and make it work. Because either don't show up or make it work, because that's your job. Good kid, right? Good kid. Doesn't say much. Come to Loretta's and wins. Never liked it, but he didn't bitch one time at Loretta's. Didn't comment one time about it. He just went out there and made it work.
Yep. Taking the playbook from the Vikings, right? Get to your destination, burn the ships. We got to make it work.
And it's not that the bike was a bad bike. We already know who the problem was here, because the stock one was great. He was the problem, right? I need this, I need that. It doesn't, dude, you're going the wrong way. You know what I mean? But you started listening, and you get into be an adult, so you start listening more, right? And it's not that there's things that he had legitimate concerns about, but they were just really hard to address. Meaning, like, I want it to be soft and I want it to be stiff. Well, sorry, dude. You and everybody else. Actually, I was up in Club MX working with the Kawasaki Canada team, and Nicoletti's riding for them. Hopefully that goes good. And he was working with a suspension company, and apparently they'd been there for 2 weeks, all day, nonstop, testing stuff. I mean, just 2 weeks of, the longest days you could imagine. I show up at the end of this 2 weeks, and we're supposed to be doing some ECU work and some stuff like that, and they're still working on that. Like, I mean, it was hard to do both, right? So it's typical vet rider. He's 38, he's a pro. He's like one of the best dudes we've had in a long time, right? This is a top 10 outdoor national pro last year. So we're talking about a bad dude. Yeah. And it's just so funny to see both sides of the equation, right? Like, he's like, I need it to be plush, but then it's got to hold up. Well, you and everybody else wants that, right? So, like, he was just going the round robin on trying to find this perfect setting, which that's their job. That's their job as a pro, right? But man, I mean, it was definitely like, so if you're a parent thinking you're struggling, so are these guys, right? I mean, you should have seen, it was like literally go make one shim change, which is almost imperceptible. Make it 3 corners. Nope. Take it out. Don't like it. And it's not that he's bad. It's, he knew, that is definitely the wrong direction. And so let's just start the other way, because but imagine if you're that guy who was doing that work for him, and you're like, oh, I changed the shim, bro. Like, you could blind test this with bunch of guys, they wouldn't know the difference, so that's the challenge. But even these top pros are chasing, those challenges. But at the end of the day, I guarantee you, whether he's happy or not, and I have no idea where they got to, where he's at now, nationals are next weekend, and he's going to be there, and he's going to be good, and he might be pissing and moaning about that bike to his team owner. I don't know. I'm not there, but I guarantee you he will be good, because he's a pro, and it's his job to be good. He'll make that motorcycle do what it needs to do. He may not win, he may not. Maybe it's the bike's fault, maybe not. But that guy will be damn good come race day. So that
reminds me. Job. Remember last year when when Jet did so well in Supercross, and we went outdoors, and he was on struggle bus the first couple. And I think we've even mentioned this a couple shows back, when Jet said, we've got the bike in the range that we need it to be. Now I can start training on it, because he's not chasing setup, as he called it, right? He's like, you said it even earlier, Dazzy's good about just kind of getting the two ends of the bookcase. We've got our framework. We've got to work in this framework. If this is the track's conditions, this is the framework we're working in. When the track's this way, there's the framework. It's not going to be perfect everywhere. To your point exactly, you just got to make it good collectively to get you to the finish line first.
And predictable. And that's what I think your takeaway was. If you can make a body that's really, really, really great fitness wise and balance and strength and agility, and then put it on a bike that you know, whether it's perfect or not, at least you know it. And then your goal is to help me as a suspension company get it to be as good as it can be, but you got to communicate, and that's part of the show.
It's got to be as good as it could be for that individual. Like I've had some high profile teams that will call me up and say, can you show us physically how the human body is responding to the adjustment we made to a bike? Stiffer suspension, stiffer frame, whatever. Yeah, we can. It's very minute, but it's very, very obvious, right? The numbers don't lie. So you stiffen something and you look at the way the body responds to it. You stiffen the forks, bigger forks, change the positioning of the forks, change the shock setting, whatever it may be, all the way down to different foams in the seat. We can show you the impact of the human body with that adjustment. Now, for amateurs that, with the exception of Loretta's, not many motos are longer than 10 or 15 minutes anymore. So you don't have as much time to get as much feedback, but that's where training comes in. We always say practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Like you're saying, and we've talked about it even on our show here. I always say to the parents, hey, when you guys are practicing starts, treat it like you're going into Saturday tied 2-1 and it's winner take all. Like put yourself in that situation. Now I know it's difficult. It's a lot harder to emulate that kind of aura of 41 other bikes. You're tied with the championship, but inevitably, if you're that good, inevitably that scenario is going to happen. How many times do you or have you experienced at Loretta's, we're going in Saturday tied, excuse me. It's between 3 to maybe 5 riders, because we've seen those where someone's gone 1-1-13. You've seen the guy that's got the points lead going in with a 4-5. I mean, it's just Loretta's.
It's wild. Actually, my first Loretta's titles, and we had been so close and so close and so close, and like injury or this or that or bike or whatever. Not, just it's like rolling the dice, because it's 3 motos. So was Ty Masterpool in 17 was our first, and I actually think I had some C-class titles prior to that, but whatever. The going into third motos was like a crapshoot. I mean, it was like him and this guy and that guy. And you just didn't know. And I remember he had if you watch those motos, if you go watch them back, they're on YouTube somewhere. Ty crashed, I think, 3 times his final moto. But managed to come up and win the title. And I remember sitting there and I didn't know who got it. I mean, I'm like, I don't think he got it. And, I'm like, whatever. And then you hear it over the announcement, Ty Masterpool, your number. And I'm like, I got what? He won? Yeah. I'm like, that's awesome, So you just don't think, that's why you got to ride hard to the end.
Think about the 250 championship we just saw. Yep. Hayden didn't know it until 5 minutes after he crossed the finish.
Yeah, with Davies. And then same with
and I like when they put the points up, as they're running right now, they would finish, Seth would win by 1 point. Then all of a sudden RJ comes in and it moves all around. And I agree with you. You race to the finish line because you have no idea. Remember that one year when AC was on 85s and his bike let go and Cooper Webb didn't know it. Cooper's just racing his heart out, trying to run down AC. AC was sitting in the infield. Cooper said he never saw him.
No, and I was there at your AC blew up I think a couple bikes. They went home early,
3 or 4. But that was also the year when the mechanic put the stock motor in the modded bike.
Oh wow! Well, I'll say the other issue. It was muddy that year. I'm sure you remember because you were working with them. It was super muddy. They dragged us in with a tractor, to the pits. It was horrible.
Yep.
We had a bad year as far as just crash every moto with a couple.
Anything that can go wrong.
Yeah. My kid had his best ride, first moto, from dead last on the start, crashed, cartwheeled, smashed the radiator, broke and bent the bars, crazy thing, came back to 11th. And we're like, whoa, kid might have something. And he ran inside top 5 that year and then faded. But long and short, I remember that year because AC blew up every moto. And then he not every moto, not a testament to anybody.
I think 4 out of 6 or something.
Yeah. And I mean, everybody did. Probably half the people didn't finish that year. But long and short, you never know. You got to race to the end. And in pro, you see it. If a guy laxes in the outdoors, couple laps to go on 5th, and then he could have got the overall, and a guy crashes in front of him, but he wasn't close enough. He laxed too much, and the guy gets up. So it's every second counts.
I always think of that when AC did his first pro race, and the interview afterwards, he said, those guys hit you like you slept with their girlfriend last night. Every last one of them, they're out to kill you. Yeah. And like I say, you're taking money out of my pocket. It's not about a trophy anymore. It's just about it. Well, Derek, I know we've gone about an hour and
Yeah.
a half here. I've got some things that I'd like to bring up in our next show. And like I said, we will move on to another subject, but I think this is a very good breaking point for us here because, when we look at the idea of finding that balance between the rider likes the bike and then the rider rides the bike really well, and then the demands of riding the bike well, and you get those constantly. And it's an ebb and flow for sure. But anything you want to close up with here on the
No, I
subject
think
of
it's been great. We obviously, if you get with coach, ask some questions physiologically you might have, or us. We try to answer everything we can on the bike. It's always generic, but yeah, we're happy to answer it. I think would be a great way to put it. And then number two, just at the end of the day, we're talking all numbers and this and that, the other. It's like, hey, don't forget, go have fun. This is what we do it for. We want to see people be successful, become top pros and make money, but you probably won't. So who cares? Go have fun. Make sure that when you're out, because I'll promise you, your kid's having a great time. You're having a great time. Mom's having a great time. Racing's going to go a lot better than if everybody's mad and unhappy and the shitty week and all these things. And you just kind of have to understand that, like, racing is I heard a dad say it to me the other day. Racing is a family sport. It takes everybody to be successful. He's a dad who gets it. His kid's pretty good. And he's like, a lot of you see these other families that haven't quite figured it out. It's like it takes everybody on board to really make this work out. And so why don't we try to do that in a way that everybody's happy to do it? The mom needs to be happy, the kid needs to be happy, the dad needs to be happy. And of course, we want to be successful. But ultimately, if everybody's happy, we're going to be more successful. So don't forget, we're talking all this crap, but hey, go out and have fun riding your dirt bike because that's why we ride them.
Exactly. And be safe. Again, this show is brought to you by our buddies over at T-Dub. It's the finest customized gear. As I said here, they do all of our custom complete racing solutions, highest quality, sublimation, second to none. Definitely check those guys out. Derek, as always, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight. For all the new subscribers, thank you and welcome. And for those of you who've been with us since day one, thank you as well. And we look forward to seeing you in a month. You guys be safe.
Thanks, Coach.
Peace.